Hello, everyone. I'm Will, and I am one of the co-hosts for the Lords of Lore. Before we get into this week's episode, I'd like to bring something up. At the end of May, a shocking discovery was made. A ground survey on the site of the old Kamloops residential school on behalf of a local First Nation community resulted in the finding of the remains of at least 215 individuals, most of which were children. Uh, Some of these remains are also found to have belonged to children as young as 3 years old. Um, all of these, all of these remains were also put into an unmarked mass grave. It is important that we acknowledge horrific findings like this. The residential school system in Canada is a dark part of Canadian history, with its effects still continuing to this day. The residential school system was an effort made by colonial and federal governments in Canada with the goal to assimilate Indigenous children into the growing Eurocentric society. Kids at a young age were removed from their families and communities and placed into compounds akin to boarding schools. They were given European names and were forced to learn European languages such as English and French. Children in these schools faced corporal punishment, such as beatings and humiliation when they were found to have used their original names and languages. There is also a wide range of evidence that shows that children had often experienced gross levels of sexual abuse. The end goal of these practices was to remove the savage from the savage. If you have little understanding or information on residential schools, this is because they were designed to be out of the public eye and out of the history books. With the last residential school having closed in 1996, we've only recently begun to understand the horrors that took place at these schools. As someone who is of First Nation descent and as a career within the legal profession, I wish that I could say that I was surprised and shocked when I first read the headlines regarding the findings in Kamloops, BC. But as someone who has had friends and family members who have been affected by residential schools and other colonial policy practices, I am quite familiar with the horrors that took place at sites like the Kamloops school. In fact, my initial thought when I saw the number of 215 confirmed uh, bodies of children, uh, my thought was there has to be more than that. And there is a high likelihood that this is the case. Personally, I predict that this won't be the last unmarked mass grave that we'll ever find in Canada, despite how much I want it to be wrong. It is also important that we acknowledge that Indigenous assimilation-based policies did not end with the closure of the last residential school, nor was it the only system that specifically targeted Indigenous children. The 60s scoop was focused on Métis children, and there was also the day school version of the residential school system. Moreover, these practices have been reincarnated through the current provincial child welfare systems throughout Canada. I personally know this as I've aided many Indigenous families in our provincial family court here in Alberta. Canadian legislation such as the Indian Act and the Criminal Code, along with its police practices, continue to supplement these colonial-based policies. If you are interested in learning more, I suggest that you look into news sites such as APTN or Windspeaker to, I guess, keep up with current discoveries and stuff like that. There's also a major push by post-secondary institutions to make information more accessible, with the Faculty of Indigenous Studies at the University of Alberta coming to mind. If you are also curious about firsthand experiences of a residential school, I would suggest that you read the novel Indian Horse, which was authored by a residential school survivor. There's also many volunteer opportunities throughout many different friendship centers in urban areas such as Edmonton and Calgary, as well as other cities. I would also suggest that you look into the website at the Native Counseling Services of Alberta for more information, as well as volunteer opportunities. I'm sure that you can also find many resources on social media sites as well. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.
Welcome back to the Lords of Lore podcast. I am Matt,
I'm Luca.
And I'm Will.
and this is the podcast for all things fantasy and sci-fi nerddom. We are continuing our series on character classes from D&D, not specifically how to build those characters or characters from D&D, but examples of those types of characters in other literature. And today we're moving on to Bards as we head alphabetically down that class list. Bards, as you know, are masters of musical instruments, but sometimes not, sometimes different things. And we'll be talking all about that, our difference of opinion on bards, as on this podcast, we do have that. But before we get into any of that, as always, we'll be getting into Luca's Litany of Literature, wherein Luca has the podcast within the podcast and tells us about his fantasy goings-on of the week. Then we'll get into Matt's Monster Musings, where I bring a monster to the table, tell you all about its edification and use in tabletop RPG games. And then Will begin our main topic with Will's Wondrous Wisdom, wherein, W time, Will takes a historical look at the origins of our main topic. So yeah, let's get straight into it with Luca's Litany of Literature.
Yeah, thanks for the intro.
Yeah, I got you.
Bard.
I'm here all night. So there's a hat with some tips.
So to add to the litany today, I have finished book 6 of Malazan. Thank you. And I am about a quarter of the way through book 7 at this point.
Damn.
I don't have any specific topic I'd like to discuss. I just want to dive into some midway series thoughts, because finishing book 6 was the halfway, or like book 6 is the halfway point essentially of the 10 books. I have to say that at this point, I can't think of a single series that is has this epic of a scope, like this large of a world that's been set up within like the first few books. The only one that I can think of that might be at that level is the Stormlight Archives. And that's only on book 4 so far, which I have not read yet, so I cannot comment on it. But like nothing like Song of Ice and Fire.
Wow.
Again, I haven't read all of Song of Ice and Fire, but like even like something like Lord of the Rings, like just the fact that you follow so many different characters in so many different places in the world, like every single book is either like characters that have survived the previous books show up in them, and then you're constantly getting new main characters, like up until the point of like book 5, like halfway through the series, we're getting introduced to like mainstay characters that will be integral to the conclusion of the story.
That's
and it is
a lot of setup.
Building towards this like just like I'm scared, honestly. Like I'm scared for the characters that I've grown to love. Like there's so many of them, and I don't want to see them die, because I've seen so many of them die already. Like there's been so many heart-wrenching death scenes that I've had to live through. Like I've been driving around the city just bawling my eyes out. And that's actually the truth.
Like 5 fantasy books to drive around the city and ball your eyes out to.
Oh man, I love this story so much. I don't even want it to end. Like I wish it was 20 books now. Like,
oh wow.
Like, and I'm so excited to read Ian Esselmott's stories, because this is Malazan's created by 2 different people at this together. And like, so Stephen Erickson wrote the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is a series of 10. And I believe Esselmott's series is just called The Book of Malazan, and it's a series of 7.
Wow. So there's 17 books.
I think so. Yeah, at least in the main series, because they've both done trilogies they've both definitely done prequel trilogies. And I'm pretty sure there's one sequel trilogy also. It might even currently be like being published by Ericsson. I can't be sure. I haven't checked because I'm not even done the main series.
Yeah. Okay,
But,
I
like,
got a big question for you then. So you're talking about scale,
mhm.
epic scale of this 10-book series. Then you're talking about there's actually 17 books, and there may be some prequel trilogies in addition to those 17 books.
Mhm.
Is this a property that could be adapted into a television series, a movie series? Is it possible, or is at this point would anything be a watered down? Like, is it not adaptable at all? Like, what do you think?
I mean, I've thought about how I would adapt it. Not to.
Yeah.
I think it'd be like incredibly difficult. I feel like you would have to essentially adapt books 1 and 2 at the same time. Like
Mhm.
you have to, because you can't do a show the way you do a book. Like you can't be like season 1 is a set of characters, and then season 2 is all of a sudden a brand new cast of characters. Like
Well,
you need
I
to
mean,
do these two.
some shows do that, I think.
I mean, it could, but it would almost be like an anthology at that point.
Yeah.
Like you would need to essentially start both books at the same time. But even then, I don't know if it's even possible, because like in a movie, it's not possible. Like without question, it's not possible in a movie. And maybe a really big TV show with a really high budget, there's just so much high fantasy that I would trust nobody with this property. Like,
Wow.
yeah, exactly. Like this.
Yeah, I think like I guess it begs the question of asking, like, after the, let's call it cold response to the final season of Game of Thrones, and I guess we'll have to see how the Lord of the Rings show plays out, or the Game of Thrones sequels and all that. But will we ever see something to the scale of Game of Thrones again? Like, will somebody ever get that opportunity again? Because it almost feel like, and I know we all disagree on the ending of Game of Thrones, but I guess I could speak for you guys in saying that it almost feels like they squandered all that hard work with a poor ending that has jeopardized other fantasy shows. I mean, The Witcher's great, but
I think we will, honestly. I think the success of the early Game of Thrones seasons has given the financial motivation to production companies to actually like make those kinds of shows and movies. And we also have, so we got The Witcher. We're getting a Witcher animated show on Netflix. We've got the Wheel of Time adaptation coming on Amazon.
Is that happening?
Yeah, it's even closer than Lord of the Rings. It's apparently season 1's finished shooting almost. Like,
oh yeah, I remember hearing about this.
Yeah, so like the Wheel of Time, I think, will be like the litmus test, if you will, of like post Game of Thrones quality. I think the issue of Game of Thrones is I will not pretend to like the ending. I thought it was just horrendous.
It's okay.
I have not rewatched the show. Like, it was just the worst thing I've ever seen. Close to, if not.
I'm rewatching it right now.
Okay, so how do you feel though, Will, during your rewatch?
So I just started season 3 like the other day, and
are you pissed off watching it knowing how it ends? Because I know you don't like the ending.
I am, but I also kind of wonder, like, I feel like the cast is just stronger, like in the earlier seasons. Like for example, like I forget the actress who plays like Catelyn Stark. Like, she's like amazing. I mean, even the guy who plays Robb Stark, I've seen him in a few other, I guess, like series and stuff like that, but like he's pretty good. And yeah, in like even some of like the minor villains and stuff like that. But and like I kind of noticed as like the show progresses, like it just kind of like, I guess, like the base of characters just like whittles down. I think that's kind of like what made it kind of disappointing and stuff like that.
I mean, Game of Thrones' problem was the fact that they ran out of source material.
That's true too. I mean, like, why continue? Like, why would you start it?
It makes it such an interesting choice that like HBO chose Game of Thrones as their fantasy series to adapt when it wasn't finished. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many great ones out there that are. Why? And like even like Wheel of Time, right? That one's finished.
Yeah.
And that's huge. And it's being adapted now. So what, was the money not right from Game of Thrones? Like,
I think it's because when A Song of Ice and Fire, the book started coming out, like it brought like the revolution of grimdark into fantasy, and then like
Right.
every publisher wanted a
Yeah.
grimdark fantasy. So like that's where all the money was, and I think they assumed it might be done by the time like the show came out, because
Oh, of course
at the
they did.
start
Yeah.
of it, he
Yeah.
was publishing books every 2 years in A Song of Ice
Yeah.
and Fire, and then like all of a sudden it was like 3 years, then 4, and now it's been 11 years I think since the last book came out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like I
So
think they
I think
assumed.
Winds of Winter was supposed to drop like 2013.
Yeah, but like the timeline that he was keeping at up until that point. So I think they might have
Yeah.
assumed that it would have been finished. Plus, A Song of Ice and Fire was like the most commercially successful book series at the time. So I feel like that's
I
what
see.
sort of. Plus, it's really low fantasy. Like it's low magic,
Mhm.
low fantasy. So it was like cheaper to produce in the early seasons. Also, is what I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Whereas like the Wheel
That's
of
good
Time
point.
is like very high fantasy.
Oh, okay.
That's what I noticed. But like after watching season 1, like I kind of see why HBO picked it up, because it's like it's still like high budget compared to like other shows, but I mean like compared to like even like season 3, it's very low budget.
It's
Mhm.
more like the first few seasons are more like a period piece than
Mm-hmm.
fantasy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, just including this massive glacier wall, and like that's
Yeah.
pretty much it.
Yeah.
Like as far as like magic goes, really.
So from like the perspective of source material, Malazan is finished, so you have the entire source to draw from. But the issue is like A Song of Ice and Fire follows Westeros. Like even if you like look at that world, like Essos has like so much more story to tell, whereas like they focus on like the what is it, 7 families? How many royal like kingdoms is there in the
7? Yeah.
7 kingdoms? Yeah. So like you focus on these stories, whereas like Malazan is, so there's the first story happening on a continent called Genebacus, the second one happening in 7 cities, the third in Letheras, and then they're all sort of intertwining. So just like such a massive, massive story. If anything, though, I would want an animated version of it.
That
Like,
would
I
be
think-
cool.
I think animated will be like possibly the future of where this all goes, because not needing actors, like if you, for example, if you have like characters that are like humanoid but not human, then you need like a lot of makeup, a lot of special effects, whereas like you can just draw that character
Yeah.
as an animation. Plus magic is easier to animate than it is to do CGI. Like I think animation, just the fact that it can sort of be that, like you can create those worlds sort of more fluidly rather than like pumping a ton of money into CGI to do it. But
Yeah.
to answer your
But
question,
it doesn't get the same audience though, right? Like
yeah, that's true.
people have these preconceived notions of who animated films or TV are for, right?
Yeah.
Careful, son. It's just a drawing.
Yeah, I know.
But I mean, we'll see, because Netflix now is like, their whole plan is to do like live action and then animated versions. Like they're doing the animated version of The Witcher and a couple others. I think they've already announced. Like, I think in their Avatar: Last Airbender project.
Yeah, they've got a contract with Avatar. They're also doing like there's a new He-Man show that's always been animated, but that's definitely in the fantasy realm. Critical Role, they have not on Netflix but on Amazon. They crowdfunded I backed it, their animated show. It got picked up for a second season. Fuck Amazon, but that's cool. So yeah, there are a lot of good animated fantasy, which I think is a little bit untapped. We see it a lot in like anime, but Western, I guess, we don't see it as much. So I'm excited for it at least. But
yeah.
I think as like computers get better and like animation gets easier, I think that'll be like where fantasy can really thrive, because you don't need to do all the CGI. You don't need all, like, you can do high fantasy and animation and like still keep the budget pretty manageable. I think. I'm not an animator.
Yeah, and like you can still get like big name like actors and actresses and stuff.
Yeah,
like
to
that.
like voice act. Exactly.
A good example would be like Castlevania on Netflix.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really massive shame it's only like a few episodes every like 2 years, but I really enjoy it. I haven't seen the latest season yet, though.
But yeah, I haven't seen it. I watched an interview with like the producer. Very, very strange. I don't even know how to explain him. Sort of like that one guy who comes into the office Robert, whatever his name is.
Oh, Robert California in the
Yeah,
show The
yeah,
Office.
yeah. I can't even remember the guy's name, but he's such an interesting individual. But yeah, well, yeah. I don't know. I was gonna say, like, if Malazan was going to exist as a television series, the first season would have to be so good, and that, and then to not come, or like the first two seasons would have to be incredible for there to be enough buy-in to justify switching continents every other season or whatever.
Yeah, you'd have to start it on multiple honestly, you might even have to start it on all three at the same time.
It would never work because you could
It
never
wouldn't.
lock those actors down to contracts to not appear in the second or third season
Yeah.
and then come back. Like, and the scheduling would have to line up it couldn't work.
Yeah, that's why you'd have to like you have to do all of the different storylines at the same time, and it'd be like
Yeah.
so hard to. It'd be like a Witcher situation where like people are like, "What is going on?" Like, is this
Yeah, I
happening
think
at
that
the
turned a
same
lot
time?
of people off from The Witcher. Like,
and they
which is
did such
really
a like they
great
did
show.
a bad job explaining it in
They
The
did.
Witcher. Like, it was really poorly done there.
It was cool, but yeah, like if there was just even like a little bit of explanation, like it's very subtle. Even when again, that's a series I went back and watched. I don't know if I'll go back and watch Game of Thrones, even though I like the ending. It's in a bow for me and somewhere else now. But I watched The Witcher again because it's awesome, and like you can pick up on it the second time you watch it, but you shouldn't have to. Like, yeah.
Anyway,
Any other mid-series thoughts?
No, just that it is epic scope, and I can't wait to see how it ends.
Nice.
I'm very scared for the ending.
We're excited to see. So let's move into Matt's Monster Musings. So last episode of the podcast, we talked about the Merilith, the Dom Daddy sixth arm snake lady.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. But today we're talking about Cockatrice. This is a Cockatrice, if I can get this to focus. Not very well, but this is a mini I painted. One of the I do a great job. But essentially, and the pictures will play now if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching on audio and want to see those, check out the YouTube channel, leave a like. The head of a rooster or a chicken, the body of a reptilian being type thing, 2 legs, and wings in some interpretations. Can also be seen like this mini I showed you with a long reptilian tail.
Like a basilisk.
Yes. So that was, I should have asked you guys first what you thought when I said Cockatrice, what images that brought up. But interesting enough that you say basilisk, Will, because these two things are intertwined and not at all the same, but have similar origins and are often confused with each other, mistaken for or interchangeable with, depending on your interpretation. So the reason why that is, and the basilisk, for anyone who doesn't know, is like can be depicted as like an 8-legged reptilian creature with blue skin and red eyes, or could be like the one you might be familiar with in Harry Potter, just a very large snake. Could also be depicted as a snake that is always sat up in I don't know what you call that when the snake is all like this and not swivelly.
World.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. But moves that way, just moves. I'm an idiot. But yeah. So the reason why, and I'm not going to give you the full breakdown of how this happened because it happened in the 13th century. Yes, I think. Could be getting it wrong. Look it up if you want to. It's a pretty interesting story about how people confuse language and how people just make up words sometimes. But there's a guy who's apparently some important figure to history because so said the video I was watching who talked about this guy. His name is John Wickla. Raised eyebrow. And he was in translating the Bible from some language to English. I can't remember. But there wasn't words that existed. And at this point in time, the English language was one that was almost exclusively spoken and not written. So it was hard for people to translate things to written English because they're basically making up what would then become the correct spelling. I theorize that this is why English is so difficult to learn, because they didn't know what the fuck they were doing when they did it, but they wanted to get ahead of the curve. And anyway, so he's trying to translate serpent, as we see in the Bible, into English from Latin. Latin was the language. But there wasn't a word, or no, it was a different language. And he translated it first into Latin and then into English. And basically it came out as Cockatrice. A friend of his who was writing a fantasy novel used that word and put it into his fantasy story to describe the snake-like being. Another person was like, "That's a cockatrice is a African crocodile or alligator." And then another person was like, "No, actually, it's this. It's like a rooster that can lay eggs." So if you're not following what I'm saying, that's the point. It doesn't make any sense, and they were all very confused by each other. And a cockatrice isn't a real thing. But why is it called a cockatrice? The second part, I don't know. But the cock part of it comes from a cockerel, which was the name for roosters in the past in Europe. And how is a cockatrice made? So, different than a basilisk, and this is where they get confused. When a chicken lays an egg that gets incubated by a toad or a snake or some sort of egg-laying reptilian creature, that egg will hatch as a cockatrice. But when a snake lays an egg and that egg gets incubated by a chicken, that'll be a basilisk. Okay? Everybody following class?
No.
So how do you ward off a basilisk, and why is a basilisk dangerous? Well, they can turn you into stone by looking at you. Some interpretations say you need to stare at it like a Medusa. Others say it can just look at you. These creatures are not at all intelligent. It has a head of a chicken. It's fucking stupid. So it might just turn you into stone willy-nilly. Some people believe that they eat stone, so that's why they turn you into stone, so that they can eat you. So if you're running an adventure and want to put one of these in, maybe your players are going through the woods and there's like, oh, this is a weird stone carving of a weasel. Actually, not a weasel. Anything but a weasel. I'll get to that in a second. Let's say a bird. Like, oh, that's weird. Yeah, that might be indicating that a cockatrice is nearby. How do you ward off a cockatrice? Well, of course, you throw a mysterious egg or an unusual egg over your house so much as it doesn't hit the roof but lands on the other side and breaks. Everyone knows that. They also have poison breath, which is poison breath, so that's deadly. Yeah, and again, like I was saying earlier, the weasel. Why wouldn't it turn a weasel into stone? Because weasels are somehow immune. Weasels and ferrets are completely immune to being turned into stone or the poison breath of a cockatrice. Weird, random thing. So a weasel can steal the eggs of cockatrice. So maybe your adventurers come across a weasel with this strange egg, and you're like, I'm not going to throw this over my house. I'm not worried about cockatrice. And then it hatches, and now you have this rooster snake Medusa thing. They're also terrified of a common chicken. Don't know why, but maybe you see a man traveling down the road with a pet ferret and a chicken held by the neck, and you're like, what are you doing, old timer? And that man's like, there's cockatrice around here. You better watch out. Here's an unusual egg if you need it. Yeah. Roosters who lay eggs, where people think this myth originated from, are called germandermorphs. I don't know if that's politically correct. It's just what they're called, so don't get at me. I don't know what it means. I just want to cover my bases. But yeah, it's basically a rooster that can lay eggs because the egg was, I don't know science either, fertilized by a male and female sperm. I don't know. These are just things I found out when researching cockatrice. But yeah, that's a cockatrice. Very strange. Doesn't make much sense. Luca, you would have encountered one in the campaign you were in of mine. I think one of you turned into stone.
Yeah,
but I
one of
could
us
be
did get
wrong.
turned into stone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it actually, you thought you had killed it, but you hadn't, and so it came back for the second fight. You guys were prepared. That was really funny. But yeah, a group of goblins were sort of like housing this cockatrice as their like beast type of thing. Yeah. Thoughts on the cockatrice?
Yeah, very unpleasant creature. Just like all around, not a fan. I mean, honestly, the moment where I hated it was the poison damage we took
Yeah.
in D&D specifically. I was like, when you brought, because you brought the mini out and I saw this thing and I'm like, okay, it's a pretty scary monster. Then they're like, and now you take poison damage. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Will, thoughts on the cockatrice?
Well, actually, The Witcher 3 had like a cockatrice, like the game, but not the episode. They were actually featured like quite, not like heavily, but like they were like a common monster that like you could take a contract to kill just
Okay.
as like a side mission. But um like actually it's actually like funny that we're covering, because it's always been one of my gripes is that in The Witcher 3, like the cockatrice, griffin, and wyvern are like all more or less like the same animals, just like different, like slightly different variations to them. So like
Do they
I
have the
would just
same like fighting style?
yeah, and just like almost
Ah.
like the same look. Like a griffin just happened to have a little bit more feathers, and like a wyvern had like a horn on its nose. But like other than that, like they all kind of like look the same. Um, Made no difference because I slaughtered them all anyways. But I also played on easy mode because I'm a weenie. But it's actually yeah. I believe they're actually immune to poison as well. Like you can't like poison like your blade and stuff like that
Yeah,
prior
I
to
think that's
fighting.
right.
You can oil your blade.
Yes.
Ooh.
I don't remember
Oiling.
what they're classified as.
Oiling.
Ornithorus.
Yeah. I don't know.
I think in D&D, I think they fall under beast or aberration, but I could be wrong.
You probably are.
Yeah, it's par for the course. Yeah, do you think like in The Witcher that just comes down to game design? Like they just
I
didn't
think
want to.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like at the time, like the developing company was like quite small. So I mean,
They do look like in The Witcher they have like the chicken heads and feathery wings.
yeah,
I mean they're classified as draconoids
yeah.
or draconids.
Yeah. Yeah. So the wings that they have, often they're depicted as like dragon wings, sort of like the reptilian aspect, but they can also be depicted as chicken wings or bat wings. I don't know where the bat wings come from, but that's a thing as well. Yeah. I wish I painted this mini better because it is a cool sculpt. So maybe one day I'll repaint it. Because these things are, I think they're cool, although like gross, but like definitely. I mean, what else is a D&D monster if not cool but kind of gross?
Me.
Yeah, so it's tough to put this against yeah. It's tough to put this against the Merilith because it's entirely outclassed. I think there's a difference of like 10 between their combat ratings. I think a cockatrice is a combat rating 2. So let's put it against the dryad. That's a little bit easier battle. But my question for you guys here is not if the dryad, its intentions are unknown to you. Let's say you've pissed off a dryad, you cut down a tree within her terrell. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back to our episode on not barbarians, but the one before that where I talked about dryads. I can't remember what we did.
Those our attempt at MacGuffins.
Was it?
I think so.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But go back to that episode and find out what a dryad is and Matt's Monster Musings in there. You can click the link in the description. We'll have all the timestamps. But so yeah, you've pissed off a dryad. You're in its terrell. It's coming after you. It can warp through trees and shit. Or would you rather piss off a cockatrice and maybe turn into stone? So we'll start with you, Luca.
Oh, honestly, they're both kind of dead end situations unless you can find a chicken, right? Like, it's like if I was near a village, I'd definitely choose a cockatrice because I'd just run for a chicken.
Right.
Keep my eyes closed. I actually can't run and keep your eyes closed. Wow, what a
Yeah,
demon.
it's tough.
I'd choose cockatrice still. I think it's the fact that it's got the brain of a chicken. I feel like I could be smarter than a chicken long enough to find another chicken. You know,
That's that quote alone is
Just ends it.
that's our first merch. What about you, Will?
Uh, yeah, I mean, just proximity to, I guess, other humans and farms. Um, I guess like if it was like, yeah, I don't know. I think Luca hit the hit the nail on the head. I was gonna say like maybe you could like, I don't know, like maybe try and like simp your way out of the dryad situation,
Simp your way out. Yeah, like most things in life, I just simp my way out.
yeah, but I mean, like I guess like you could probably like evade a cockatrice, like if you're like in like a forest or something, like probably not like out in the open, but like to hide behind a tree or something
Yeah,
like
as
that.
long as you're breaking the line of sight between you and you're probably good, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Whereas if you try to hide behind a tree fighting a dryad, come
it'll
out of the
just
tree, just
simp
fuck
me
you going.
forever. Yeah, no, I think I'll take the cockatrice.
Yeah, you're always taking the cock. Just, but that'll end Matt's monster musics. So now let's jump into the main topic, starting off with Weenie Will's wondrous wisdom.
Yes. But can I simp my way through this?
Yeah, please do.
So today's topic is bards. Keeping in theme with going through the various, I guess, classes of people, and also non-humans. Um, so,
Non-humans
how,
are
how,
also people.
yeah, how do you guys like how would you define a bard? I guess that's for Luca. Hit me up.
I mean, I took a bit of a more broad definition just from like a minstrel or like a music player. I feel like a bard would be anybody that like shares stories. Maybe even like a historian could be considered a bard. A king's fool type person.
Yes.
Maybe like a traveling, even somebody who's in like a circus, I'd classify as a bard. Any kind of like entertainment or person who's like what's that word? I forgot. Essentially, just like a traveler of the world and collector of stories. A troubadour, excellent word. Yes.
Mummer.
Yeah, another good one.
I would say I think mine is probably exactly like yours. But in terms of like fantasy and stuff, I think it's someone whose power comes from their art, or they're driven by their art to get power, or just an entertainer. Also, just want to throw this out there because the word will come up when we say minstrel. We're referring to its actual definition. Word is a little bit muddled by racism and blackface depictions in the 20s to like, sometimes even today, because people are fucking stupid. But when I say minstrel, I'm referring to like a court jester and not some idiot in blackface, just to be clear.
I did not even know that was a thing. Thank you.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. But yeah, that's how I would describe.
Yeah. See, like, I mean, like when you say bard, the first thing that comes off the top of the first thing that comes to like my mind is just, like they're like playing like a mandolin or like that like medieval ages guitar thingamajig.
Yeah.
and just like, ultra tight pants. Pretty much Dandelion from the Witcher series on Netflix and in the games and books, of course. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like, I mean, like bards or just like the role of a bard, like an entertainer, has just been around like forever. When I was like doing like research, it's almost like it was kind of hard because I mean, like entertainment has like always been a thing. Um, but at the same time, they're also like a very important role, like kind of like what Luca was saying, like where he was alluding to bards being or like historians being included as a bard.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, back in the day, there was no like historian departments that would be like pumping out like all this research and stuff like that. It was just everything was more or less word of mouth, kind of like how you said like earlier
Ye
about
old Lords of Lore podcast.
yeah. It was like the town crier was your newspaper kind of thing. So like um yeah, like bards were also like pretty important because they would spread information. I mean often sometimes or not often but sometimes like embellished a bit, especially if they were talking about like I guess like folk heroes and stuff like that. But I mean a lot of times they're the reason why a lot of like important narratives and other literature works have like survived today, like for example like Beowulf. um I mean that was pretty much like an oral telling that survived over the ages and stuff like that, mostly in part due to I guess like the Nordic version of bards as well as some of like the Anglo-Saxons and stuff like that. But yeah, but I don't know, like whenever I see like bards, I guess like in a lot of like for example like video games and stuff like that I've played recently, a lot of times they kind of like break from I guess that stereotypical role of just like the weird looking guitar playing kind of thing.
Yeah.
I definitely like some of like the I guess like the alternatives like the court jester and stuff like that. But yeah, what are you guys' thoughts?
On like just in general.
Yeah, just bards in general before we start naming some specifics.
I love bards.
Why?
Uh one of my favorite classes to play in D&D, but I would, I would even say if you had to put me uh defined as a class, I would definitely consider myself a bard. Um I'm a musician, an amateur musician. Um and I think that's why we do this podcast is uh I like speaking and informing and learning things via storytelling. And I mean that's why we're into fantasy and stuff, because it's an alternate form of storytelling. That's why we're into role playing games. Um, and I think like it's our nature as humans to tell stories and to entertain each other. I just think that's our nature. Um, and I think Bard is one of the professions that exists inside tabletop role playing games that also exists in real life as a class. Like you could say fighter, but I mean that's boring. But a bard is sort of like in our society is one of the highest forms of celebrity. Like Drake is a bard, and any other highly paid musical performer is definitely considered a bard technically. Yeah, I love
Just
bards.
anyone with charisma.
Yeah, and there's that aspect too. Like if you're talking about like D&D bards, it's not just I'm highly skilled, because you could be highly skilled and lack charisma. And I mean, a lot of artists in the real world are. Yeah.
Forever the drummer.
Oh my god. Yeah, no, but for real, like, so, but and I think it is cool to play that. Like, what would a bard with low charisma look like? Like, they would still be highly skilled, so they would still have power, right? They could still sway a room. Um, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I'm ranting. Go ahead, Luca.
Yeah, I mean, I love bards too. Who doesn't like bards? In real life,
Me.
of course. All right, we'll get into that later, I guess. Yeah, I mean, like you said, humans are social. We love to tell stories and hear stories. As long as humans have existed, we've made stuff up, and the people who made that stuff up were bards. Even if it's just spoken word, it still counts.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And again, that's why we have so much. Like when you look at like the backbones for like a lot of like literature and stuff like that, and like a lot of like literary classics are mostly in due part to, like, I guess, the bards of the day. Yeah, so I guess you guys want to talk about our favorite bards, possibly
Yeah.
our least liked.
Let's do it.
Ooh. Yeah, absolutely. Luca, let's start with you.
Alrighty. Well, I'll mention my background
Nice.
is some fan art of Kvothe from the King Killer Chronicles. And Kvothe is a bard. He grew up in a family of musicians and actors,
That's
and
tough.
he traveled with a troupe that entertained kings and officials of various cities. I won't dive in too deep into Quoth just because I am halfway through the Name of the Wind, which is the first book in the King Killer Chronicle, and I never finished it.
Okay.
Not because of anything that would be having to do with this theme, because all the scenes in the book that had like music or bards in it were like really, really well written, and you go like, so the writer is really good at making like writing that sounds almost like he's a bard. Like just the writing flows really nicely, especially when Quoth is talking. But there's something about the book that just didn't click with me. It didn't scratch every itch that I'm looking for in a fantasy novel. Plus, it's not finished, and it's been like 7 or 8 years since book 2 came out, and it's a trilogy.
This is Rothfuss, right?
Yeah, Patrick Rothfuss.
Okay. Also a D&D player. Maybe we could do Name of the Wind as one of our episodes of Ruminations. You could check Ruminations out once per month while we do a book review.
I would be down for that. Might even finish it at that point. I will finish it, of course, but yeah. Quoth is like a super interesting character because he's a natural born genius, and essentially talented at whatever he tries. So first time he picked up a lute, pretty much he was almost like instantly a prodigy.
Like me with his ocarina.
Yes.
Thanks, Will.
So it's kind of funny that I made Quoth my background, considering I know very little about him, but
it's a sweet picture though.
It is a cool picture, right? And he's always carrying that lute around. That is his father's lute.
Oh, cool.
Weird medieval guitar thing. That's what I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah, so Quoth, excellent bard. I would recommend the book, even though it wasn't my favorite. Anyway, let's move on to some of my favorite bards. And of course, I have to talk about Malazan again. So
brother.
So there is one bard who I actually have not seen in the book. But so before every chapter in Malazan, there's like essentially like a little excerpt of some written text in the world of Malazan, and then like says who said it or wrote it or whatever. And oftentimes it's quoted from somebody named Fisher Keltath. And he has quotes that like describe historical events throughout like the entire 6 books so far. And he's just like some kind of sort of like a historian, also like a traveling historian, I think. I still haven't met him. But the true bard of Malazan I want to talk about is Fiddler. And Fiddler is a character that is introduced in book 1. So he is somebody that I've grown to love very deeply as a character. And he actually, so he's named Fiddler, which is a nickname given to him by one of the sergeants who trained him. It's like a thing in Malazan where this sergeant, he gives nicknames to every soldier he trains, Fiddler among them. And he has like a lute that he just never plays until book 6 is the first time we hear him play, or like he plays in the book. And as he's playing, essentially he's playing during the climax of the story, where there's just like essentially an extremely chaotic scene happening in Malaz City, which is a city that was the founding essentially city of the Malazan Empire. And everybody in the entire city can just hear this music in the background, even though he's just like, he's sitting in a room playing for 2 people. And he's essentially playing a song that's meant to remember their lost friends. And throughout the whole essentially climax of the story, you keep hearing like characters mentioning like I keep hearing that music in the background, or like people that know him are saying like, oh, like there's a quote from one of my favorite characters who says like he's hearing the song and he can recognize who it's about. And even though he's in a life and death situation, he's like, his heart is breaking listening to the music that Fiddler's playing.
Man, that's so cool.
So some mysteries there. Don't know why everybody could hear it. But Fiddler is a fantastic bard. Also just want to shout out to Cacophonics from Asterix and Obelix. I'm wearing a shirt with Obelix's face on it.
What is this?
Asterix and Obelix, you guys know, it's like it was like a French comic series about like Vikings fighting Romans.
No.
You never heard of it? It's like a big fat guy who's like his pants are like a pot.
No, this must have been a French immersion thing.
Huh, yeah, maybe. Will, do you know Asterix and Obelix? Oh, really? You guys don't know Asterix and Obelix? No. Oh, wow. That's crazy.
I know Tintin.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, I don't actually. He's essentially, cacophony is like a word, and his name is Cacophonics.
Oh, okay.
He's always playing some kind of like trumpeted instrument, and everybody hates his music. I just wanted to throw out
the Squidward of French comics.
Yeah, like an untalented bard. And I have one more example that I love. He's not specifically a bard. He falls more under the sort of traveling jester type, except he's like a very ambiguous character who falls, who's mentioned in multiple Brandon Sanderson novels. And his name is Wit or Hoyd. And in the, I almost said Malazan, in Stormlight Archives, we meet him as Wit, and he is the essentially the king's I want to say jester, but he's not like a fool. He doesn't like, he essentially, his role is essentially to make fun of the nobles there. But I have one good quote from him. This is Hoyd says to Dalinar, one of the main characters that we follow, the foolishness of men who care, Dalinar, and the brilliance of those who do not. The second depend on the first, but also exploit the first, while the first misunderstand the second, hoping that the second are more like the first, and all of their games steal our time, second by second.
What? I like it.
So Hoyd is just like I don't even know what he is. Like, he's almost implied to be like a deity type character. Like, he appears on like multiple worlds in these stories, and like it's only implied that he's the same person until Stormlight Archive, where you find out that this is like sort of the same person in these few stories.
Wow.
And he's just he is, I love how he insults like the nobles and stuff, and everybody's assuming that he's like this sort of helpless like fool that they can kill at any time, so they don't even like take his words too seriously. But he's like incredibly intelligent and clever. I think I have one more quote that isn't bad. 1, 2, 3. Yes. So this is what Hoyd said to one of the other main characters who follow, Kaladin. Says, I began life as a thought, a concept, words on a page. That was another thing I stole, myself. Another time I was named for a rock. A pretty one, I hope. A beautiful one, the man said, and one that became completely worthless for my wearing it. That's just interesting, because that first sentence, I began life as a thought, a concept, words on a page. It's like, that's exactly how the character began on like Brandon Sanderson's pages.
Very meta, yeah.
And
that's
then like
cool.
I stole myself. Like I just thought that was like such an interesting thing, like almost like breaking the fourth wall. Like he's almost aware of what he is in the scope of the story.
Oh, dude, I love that. That's so sick.
I just thought that was like such an interesting, like there's just like Brandon Sanderson. If you haven't read Brandon Sanderson, go read anything by Brandon Sanderson. The man is a
We'll have to
wizard.
do one of his for ruminations. Holy.
Anyway, those are some of my favorite bards. I don't
Any
have any least favorite bards.
Do you have any honorable mentions?
Yeah, I mean like Dandelion. I won't dive into. Do I have any other ones? I do not have any written. If I think of any, I will mention them later.
Right on. Okay. So I have a bunch of honorable mentions. So Will, if any of these are on your list, just let me know and I won't you can dive into them obviously. So I don't know him as Dandelion because I've only ever seen the show. I started playing the game, but I didn't get far enough where you encounter this guy. So Yaskir is how I know him. And holy shit, if this isn't the quintessential bard, if you want to play a bard in the campaign, you go watch the show and now imagine him with magical powers, and that's a D&D bard. But man, does that song slap! Holy, man, fucking fire! I remember that episode and be like, man, this guy's kind of annoying, and then that motherfucker hit, and I was like, damn, he got it, he won me over. You were just talking about the guy from the Stormlight Archives. So I think like a lot of trickster gods also fall in the category of bard because they're like relying completely off charisma. They like to make a show of it when they show up, and then they're gone the next day. Like how some bards like to live their lives. But it also reminded me for some reason, like the court jester thing, reminded me a lot of Mimir, who I would say is a bard, not in their musical talents but being able to recite all these stories and just bits of information definitely serves that same kind of role, and how he travels or seems to travel from mythology to mythology. I'm speaking specifically of Mimir from God of War. I don't know anything about real Norse mythology. I'm an idiot. Reminded me too of the lawmaker in the Planet of the Apes series. If you've seen the newer movies, it's like the Maurice character who, spoiler alert, goes on to tell the story of Caesar and make the laws, or maybe it's the lawgiver. I could have the name wrong, but that
I think
character,
it's lawgiver.
lawgiver.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of implied that it's Maurice. It's not specifically stated, so take that as you will. Really funny one is the tale of Sir Robin in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Basically, these minstrels follow this knight around, one of the knights of the Round Table, and they sing about how, oh, he's so brave, he's going into battles, he's not scared of having his arms torn off or stabbed in the throat or shit his pants. He's so brave, and he's like, please stop. He's like, oh, he's a coward, he runs away. Blah blah blah. It's fucking if you haven't seen it, it's like a minute long clip. Go look it up. Another one I thought was interesting to include is Tom Bombadil from the Lord of the Rings, a bard in that his magic comes from the singing of songs, songs that hold power over not only people but ancient denizens of the Middle Earth.
Like a druid?
Like sort of, but I think more because he's always depicted as sort of like a combination between the two, actually, a multi-class, if you will. But yeah, I think that's also interesting you bring that up, Will, in that in a lot of fantasy, arcane magic comes from reciting specific phrases along with some somatic components and physical components that go into casting spells. I think it's so cool that like singing a spell into existence, the way the world was formed in Lord of the Rings, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. That's just so cool to me. They're like, yeah, you wizards with your and I'm just like, ha, and the fucking same thing happens. That's so much cooler. Hitting that high note, I'm going to deep dive before I get into a couple more honorable mentions into what I think might be my favorite bard. And this is an example that's only sort of from fantasy and not from sci-fi. This would be Jack Black, as he's known in the real world, but Jables from Tenacious D. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Good. Because obviously there's a fantastical aspect in that they actually converse with the devil at one point, and they're trying to find a pick that has magical powers so they can become the best artist in the world. And I think these characters, JB and KG, Kyle Gass, um, they go on this journey to find this magical pick and do it all through song. And they're so devoted to their craft. But for me, it also bridges the gap between fantasy and real life. Like, I don't know, if you just look at like metal bands from like the 80s, all of their artwork on their albums and all the merch you can get, it all is the same style of art as like that 70s 80s fantasy, like the fucking homoerotic bards or barbarians we're talking about, or bards too, whatever you fancy.
Led Zeppelin for sure.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin like even has songs about Middle Earth, like Misty Mountain Hop and shit. And a few other their other songs, there's references to things that appear in like the Tolkien verse. Yeah, I don't know, like for me, like I had this revelation last year watching, like my friend went to this metal show maybe 2 years ago where they were like their guitars were like big axes or swords, and they were like wearing Viking helmets. And I was like, oh shit, metalheads are just fantasy nerds that had too much energy. They can't sit down to play D&D, so they fucking smashed it on stage. But they're the same people. Like, I don't know, it all just sort of hit me. And I think Jack Black and Jables in this movie is like the perfect middle ground between like, yeah, I'm gonna fight the devil with music, but also like the music is fucking good. Like people go and see Tenacious D on tour because they're good, not just because it's a good movie or they're super big fantasy fans or anything like that. It's good music, put together with that sort of bringing power to rock and roll. And in one part, I think it's a dream sequence in the movie, he literally like blows the guy's mind. He just hits a note that's so high, the guy just
Yeah.
yeah.
When he's in the bar, yeah.
Yeah.
As a side note, there was a video game published
Yeah.
in 2009, Brutal Legend, which featured
Yeah.
Jack Black. Like it's like a spitting image and voice acted by him.
Mm-hmm.
Except
And
he's
he has like the guitar axe thing, right?
more of a barbarian, if you will.
Yes.
But,
Yeah. And that you could even say Jack Black in, obviously not fantastical at all, but in School of Rock is also like high charisma, very talented, shouldn't be doing what he's doing type of, but like the roguish bard character, like infiltrates a school to teach kids how to play music, totally neglecting their education. Totally illegal. But what a movie. Unfortunately, I think I can't remember his name, so sorry, but the drummer, the person who played Freddie in that movie, unfortunately passed tragically last weekend. So rest in peace.
Yeah, that was sad.
Yeah. A couple more honorable mentions. Scanlan from Critical Role. I'll never stop talking about Critical Role. It's what got me into D&D and stuff. But Scanlan, incredible bard. Picked Gnome Bard as his character because he assumed it would be the shittiest class combinations to put together, and he would just be a joke that got killed off very Luke, you're nodding your head and I know why. Well, maybe that's for a later time. But yeah, Scanlan's a great character. There's one sequence that is actually being animated. This is one of the arcs that they chose to turn into a animated season, where he infiltrates this building in town, and he somehow gets separated from the rest of the party. So it's him against some high level enemies and some henchmen, and it's just him. And throughout the sequence, spoilers if you don't want to know, but he turns into a T-Rex. He dimension doors himself a few times up and off the roof. He sets the house on fire. He takes out, like, I don't know how many of these guys he takes out. And it's like the set off moment. They're like trying to reclaim this town from vampires, and the whole town is sort of under the control of these like vampire lords. And this moment he like sets this house that belongs to one of the important sort of big henchmen of this cult of vampires. And they like make out of the smoke from this burning house, they make the symbol of the family, the royal family, who's coming to reclaim it. And it's one of the big moments where the town finally gets behind the party. It's really fucking cool. And it was all this shitty gnome bard who did it. So yeah, other honorable mentions. That fucking rooster from Robin Hood. That guy rocks. He's got loot. He's a bard. Liliana from Dragon Age Inquisition. A really cool take on bards being spies and assassins, which you
Yeah.
can definitely play into your RPG characters.
And
Yeah,
she was in the original Dragon Age
yeah,
Origins as well.
yeah,
But
and I think
like
it was
her character like in Inquisition is like way cooler.
yeah. Yeah, just that order of bards who are trained to be like I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but basically trained to infiltrate high levels of society and the upper class so that they can spy on them and assassinate them where need be is just super cool. Varric, in that similar way that him writing a book while he's doing this adventuring and being like this suave asshole, like yeah, sort of a bard as well. And then this lady here, Meriden Hollowell, who has, like Yaskir, one of the best slaps of bards ever in Sarah. Oh man, what a fucking song. That song always gets stuck in my head. But she is played by a woman named, and I'm probably going to fuck this up, but of Russian descent, but a New Yorker named Elizaveta Kirapunova. She's Russian, but her stage name is her first name, Elizaveta, and obviously super talented. The Pied Piper one from our real world fiction, definitely a bard. His magic can lure people into their deaths. Link, obviously, in that a lot of his magical abilities are brought by magical instruments. And I would finish by saying Samwell Tarly from Game of Thrones, also a bard in that, not in the musical sense, but in the I am a storyteller or information gatherer. And that's my contribution. Yeah, holy. Sorry, that was a rant. Obviously, if you can't tell, this is one of my favorite types of characters. So, Will, follow that up.
So like I think I mentioned earlier, like my favorite types of bards like aren't just like the stereotypical, I guess, like lute player.
What do you have
like
against lutes?
I don't know, they're weird, man. Maybe because I have no
guitar thing.
I have no creative talent, so I'm just deep down I'm just jealous and angry.
Is that why you hate big guys too?
Yeah, big guys
Oh
too.
no. Sipping for big dudes with lutes.
I think like my favorite bard would have to be actually the group, like a group of bards actually. The Bloody Mummers from A Song of Ice and Fire. So like they kind of like they're like kind of featured in like season 3 of Game of Thrones, like the TV series, but like they don't
Not with
like
Ed Sheeran, right?
no, that's later on.
Okay.
I think that was like season 7, I think. But
Yeah.
no, they're like the ones who like cut off Jamie Lannister's hand. So like in the book series, like it's pretty much just like this like fucked up evil mercenary like circus group. So like hence the name the Bloody Mummers and stuff like that. So like a lot like they're like a lot of like the mercenary uniforms and stuff like that are like based off of like I guess like jesters and stuff like that. And like it's kind of like cool. It's like a terrifying circus version, but like not like terrifying in the sense of like horror, but like terrifying in the sense that it's just like I don't know, just like I mean like the world of Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire is super brutal, right? So it's kind of weird. Another one is Lowe's from I think that's how you pronounce her, or at least that's how I've always pronounced her from the Divinity Original Sin series. So like she's kind of cool. So she's like a bard who kind of like plays instruments, but also does like a lot of like acting. Um, like a lot of like she'll do like one act plays and stuff like that. Super charismatic, but she's also like I don't want to like add any like reveal any spoilers, but like she has like this thing going on because she was like afflicted by like a demonic entity. So basically she has like a whole like in like untold number of like personalities like in her head like possessing her. But like so like when she's just like I guess like the normal version of like when she's being herself, she's just like super normal. Just charismatic, like easygoing, fun-loving bard. Um, but then like pretty much with like the flip of a coin, like her like personality will change and she'll be like this like terrifying like sorceress and can like slaughter everyone and stuff like that. Definitely a cool take on like the class and I guess just like personality group. I don't know. Yeah, I guess Tyrion Lannister would be. Would you consider him to be a
Oh
bard?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't even know. I
Yeah.
didn't think of that.
Even more so in the books.
Yeah, always jesting around, such as Cicero from Skyrim.
Would you say Cicero's a bard?
I would. I mean, he's definitely is like a jester,
Yeah,
a
that much
clown,
is
if you
certain.
will.
I would say a damn fool.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I always like slaughtered him every time.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
hate that
I mean,
guy.
had to. But
He betray everyone. Fuck that guy.
there was one playthrough where I made him my toady, so I embraced him. Cicero and his annoying voice.
Man, I killed that motherfucker. And I took his outfit and put it on a mannequin. Fuck that guy.
Killed him and stuffed him and put him in your house.
No, come on.
Okay, Hannibal. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess that's kind of all that I got. I don't know. Bards have just like never been like the class I always go to for like anything. So it was kind of like weird for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're gonna come to we had similar things like Luca and I think on last episode we said like we're not really drawn into playing barbarians so much, whereas you are. Um, Luca, are you at all drawn into playing a bard?
not really, honestly. Um, I can't sing at all.
Yeah.
I
Can't
have
act.
no singing talent, and if I'm playing a magic user, I just immediately go to wizard or sorcerer. So yeah, bard is honestly, if of all the classes, I have to say I'd rather be a barbarian than a bard in
Wow.
D&D.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Personally, like it'd be some sort of magic user. It's like sorcerer, warlock, druid, even. But
Yeah, I think there was one I just thought of when you were talking, but now I forgot about it. Also like Flight of the Concords though, that to me
Yeah.
reads as like a bard with very low charisma. Because like in that show, like they
painfully
it never
every
works out.
scene.
Yeah. Like when he sings about you're the most beautiful girl in the room. Maybe top 3 on the street, depending on the street. It's like not good with people at all. What a fantastic show, and that music was super. Like me and my friends all listened to Flight of the Conchords when we were younger, so maybe that's why I'm drawn into shitty bards. One of my favorite characters that is my go-to character when I go into a different game, a fantasy sort of setting, or somebody else's D&D game. They're like, "Hey, do you want to play tonight?" I'll always bring my tiefling bard named Juanit Wandar. Spelled with JUAN apostrophe IT WONDAAR, Juanit Wandar, whose origins were as a cleric, but in a devastating thing as you do in D&D, he turned into a bard to to cope with his pain. He's a total jackass who it's not really you know, he doesn't understand people, but his charisma is so high that you know, he's able to overcome his otherwise rude sort of personality, I guess. Yeah, and all my spell casting, like when you're a tiefling, you get Infernal Legacy, which gives you like cutting words. So you just insult somebody so bad that they take damage. or you can like, I think even like comedians would be considered bards. So there's a spell called Hideous Laughter, and you just tell a joke that's so bad or so good that someone drops to the ground. So when I'm role playing as One Eat Wonder, I tell like a very bad dad joke that like physically pains the person so much that they take damage and are incapacitated. Like they cringe so hard.
Cringe to death.
Exactly. And I think I've killed people that way before. So yeah, super fun for me to play a bard. Luca, has there ever been a bard in a game that you ran?
No, I've never had a bard in one of my campaigns. I have had a bard in my party.
What was that experience like?
It was,
And be as honest as you want.
I mean, it was like not having a bard there. Like the bard didn't fulfill any of the roles that a bard would normally fulfill. Like in D&D, a bard would, you know, what is that? Inspire the group. This bard did no such thing. I don't know if it happened. You might remember better, but I was never inspired. I don't know if maybe it happened once or twice in like, I don't know, a few months we played.
Yeah.
So I've never experienced an actual bard on the team, and he never sang also.
Yeah, I think so for anybody out there who plays tabletop role-playing games, if you're sort of, you know, hesitant to play a bard because you don't want to sing or you don't want to be the character that has high charisma, that's okay. I mean, if you have a good DM, I think probably at the time I wasn't a great DM, and I maybe pushed that player to being more bardly than they wanted to be, and that turned them off from being a bard eventually. Whereas you make mistakes sometimes, but if that's something you want to do, you should go for it, but you should know that you're sort of expected to, because when you don't, bard becomes really tough to sort of play when you're not doing those types of things, especially like playing with a bigger group, where roles are more sort of like defined.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and if you're a player who likes the idea of a bard, but you don't want to do that at all, you shouldn't do it. Like if that's your expectation for what a bard is and you're not comfortable with it, play a sorcerer, because it'll still be your charisma. You can eventually get into it. But I think a bard is, and obviously you could role play that out where you're a bard who's just finding their legs type of thing. But yeah, I think a bard is sort of tough in that it's one of those classes that comes with like the preconceived notions that like you have to be a charismatic person yourself.
Yeah.
What about
yeah.
you, Will? Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, Luke, I cut you
No, I
off.
was just gonna say, it's like for me, it's honestly one of like the hardest for like role playing purposes. Like I would say maybe the hardest class to get into if you're like new to role playing, especially.
Yeah, or it could, if you're new to role playing, it could be the easiest one because you can sort of be a like a dick. Like, yeah. Luca, or sorry, Will, any experiences with bards in RPG games?
No, I don't think I've like anytime like any form of role playing game. Like I never choose like that bard or just like rogue overclass in general. Like I don't think I've ever done it for like Skyrim, for example.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever play one in a game because I think the appeal of it to me is the high charisma, being able to say stupid things and convince people of it or act your way out of situations.
Yeah. Actually, like it's funny that you mentioned like charisma, because in for example like Fallout like 1 and 2, like from like the 90s, early 2000s, like if your charisma stat was too low, because like again it's like post-apocalyptic, so there is kind of like a bard class but not really. But like if your charisma was like too low, like your character couldn't talk or like properly, like, or they were just like plain like outright illiterate, and like that would like reflect with like the stories and like interactions with like other characters, because like there's like a lot of like villains that you could just like without fighting them, you could just like talk them your way out of the situation and like just like resolve thing like everything like amicably. But like if you don't have that charisma stat high enough, you're just like I'll throw a rock at you, or like
Yeah.
unga bunga, like that type of stuff. But which is funny because like I never ever play like that rogue, I guess like umbrella class, but like when I play like for example like whenever there's like a charisma stat, I always like max it out because like it just like makes the game easier for me because I'm lazy. So yeah. Um
Yeah, actually, now that you mentioned like Fallout New Vegas is what probably the closest I ever got to playing that kind of character, where like I maxed out speech,
mhm.
where so you can essentially talk you out of any situation, or like convince people to do, like you can essentially convince people, like convince your enemies to fight each other, you convince them to like become your friends, or like that you're not a threat, and like you can do like the non-violent route and just be like a talker through the whole game, which is like a cool playthrough. But again, you can't really play like a
Yeah.
singing bard in like a video game as
Yeah.
of yet.
Weird. I mean, you could just like sing at the TV or whatever, or like monitor. But
Like, if you don't play as a bard in a D&D campaign, how are you going to seduce the dragon?
That is an
you can do
excellent
that.
point.
You could do it if you're Will as a barbarian. I figured out what I wanted to talk about. And it's back to JB from Tenacious D, in that I think it's also a good example of almost like a warlock, but you can sort of fuse it in with bard, again being a charisma based spellcaster. That connection you might have, like there comes, like, you know, like guitarists in like the 80s and 90s was like, oh, he sold his soul to the devil so he could be a better guitarist, like Devil Went Down to Georgia type thing. Anything like that, or he sold his soul to have a golden voice. That sort of saying that we have, that sort of demonstrated in Tenacious D pretty clearly. But also in D&D, you can do similar things. Like there's, you can, you know, you might go to the Feywild and there's a bard who's played his fingers off because this archfey was just so enthralled by this bard's skill that they took them back to the Feywilds and forced them to play until they couldn't play anymore. Or maybe there's like somebody with like no fingertips at a bar in your world being like, they took me to the Feylands, and everyone's like, yeah, that guy's, he's lost it, but he's not lying. Like, that's a fun like plot hook type of thing. Um, yeah, I like that sort of sold the soul to the demon to become an expert player, and then what that might look like as a plot thread. Luca, how would you write for a bard if you were running a game?
Just before
Or
I dive
just
into
in,
that, you reminded me of an episode of Futurama where Fry changes hands with the robot devils to play.
yeah.
So how would I write for a bard? Honestly, I don't know. Like, I feel like it would depend on the personality of the player playing the bard. Depending on how comfortable they were, I'd want to like put them into situations and see how they would try to like use their charisma to get out of it. Try to like talk their way out of something, or like essentially put them in situations where they're forced to figure out solutions for you just using like speech, or like playing a song, or like put like I feel like it would be hilarious to put them in front of like a deity or something, and they have to like sing me a song, mortal.
Yeah. Play
Yeah.
the best song in the world.
I think like a way like if you're like jumping into it and you're like, I guess like apprehensive, is like what I would do, like if or like if I were to like ever play a bard, would just be like a washed up like shitty bard
Yeah.
that like, you know, like so you still have like the powers, but you're just like, yeah.
Yeah, just playing like half a lick on the
suck.
guitar. It's like mumbling.
Yeah.
Like an always drunk bard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I think maybe just as a for writing your RPG characters, or just writing characters, you got to start not at their highest point. If you're starting playing as a bard, they can't already be a star, or if they were, they can't be anymore. Or like they have to be like a hubris involved in that. I play another bard in this modern game. It's like a superhero game. His name is Landon LaFleur, and he's like a punk rock bard. He's got one eye. He's like a clone of this other superhero, but his powers in the game, like his class is celebrity. And so his powers come from his interaction with his fans and just like sonic powers, but mostly just general hubris and like cult of personality is how you get all your abilities. So by simply thinking you're better than other people, you can achieve more. It's so silly, but everything I do, like if I'm doing something in the game, I'll try to find a punk pop song that coincides with like if I'm talking the civilian off the ledge, I wish you would step back from that, like just stupid shit. I don't know. 'Cause I feel like as the bard, not only in game but outside of game, your role is to make people or to like entertain people. Like what dumb song is Matt gonna sing next? Like where are you? Just stupid shit like that. Yeah, no, I fucking love bards. You guys want to add anything else about using bards in like RPGs or like in general fantasy or?
I think we covered pretty much everything that I can think of, like where you could use bards.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
great. Well, then that has been our episode on bards. Stay tuned in this series. What's next? Clerics?
Clerics, yep.
Clerics. And I think we're gonna put clerics and paladins, like that divine sort of spellcaster flavor. We're gonna put them in. So if you were looking forward to paladins further down the line, fear not, they're coming with the clerics. But also, we're gonna be having a special guest, the first time ever on the Lords of Lord podcast. On that show of clerics and paladins, so watch out for that. If you missed it last week, in place of a normal episode, I released an episode of Unabashed with a friend of the show, Rubar Hyken. We talked about Maple Story. It's one of my most favorite interviews I've ever done, even of my own. He really put his heart out there. It's really good. So check it out. I can't wait for everyone to see it. We're recording this before it's been released, so I'm still very excited for that to come out. But if you've already seen it, make sure you're liking the video, tell your friends about that episode of Maple Story. And I think that'll do it here. I think that's it for announcements, unless I'm missing something, guys. No, I got it all. I'm the best.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, as a spoiler, I may have just said that I do not like bards, but my favorite class is paladin. So,
oh,
yeah.
The next one will be interesting because I like seeing what the three of us are inclined to play more in RPGs or TTRPGs or whatever the case may be, because I think that's an interesting insight to our own personalities.
Yes.
But as always, I am Matt.
I'm Luca.
And I'm Will.
And we are the Lords of Lore.